In the culture war, there are no winners, just podcasters. Only a few are willing to risk their lives in the face of some of the dumbest ideas to have ever captured human civilization. Every week, we, Meghan Daum and Sarah Hayter, humbly accept this mission in order to bring you conversations that are equal parts unapologetic, uncompromising, and bitter. Welcome to a special place in hell. How's life in hell for you today, Sarah?
Going good. We're recording later than our normal time, so that's nice.
Yeah,
I've gotten to decompress.
7 o'clock in the morning for me.
Yeah, that's nice.
Yes. And I'm also, for those of you watching on YouTube, I am attempting to do this without my glasses because I'm so sick of them reflecting off the screen.
But can you read? Like how good
I
is your
have
eyesight?
enlarged the print on my documents to 64-point font. So I can see, it's like the eye chart. Like I'm looking at the top line of an eye chart.
Cool.
Yeah. Apparently, the way anybody over a certain age, if they're doing a video podcast and they don't have reading glasses on, they're using a teleprompter.
Really?
Fun fact. Yes. Yes.
Okay.
So if our people would like to donate to the cause, getting me a teleprompter. Just something to keep in mind.
I've always wanted glasses. I think I would look good in glasses.
You would, but just look, you'll get them soon enough.
Okay.
And you can always get fake ones.
Yeah, but that, I don't know. That's not what I want. You know what I mean? Like I want the whole thing. I want the true, real partial disability.
Yeah. It is a disability, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah. I feel like everybody gets LASIK now, so you don't see glasses as much as you used to. It's funny because when you look at a picture from like the 70s, not only is everybody really thin, so many of them are wearing glasses because people didn't have contact lenses.
Yeah. I think people wear contact lenses a lot. Yeah. I know some people who've had LASIK, but I know lots of people would just wear contacts every day. Yeah. My husband wears contacts every day and his entire family is just glasses people, but they all wear, so many of them wear contacts. You wouldn't know.
Oh, I wear contacts, but I need
reading,
I need reading glasses to see the screen. That's the issue.
Oh, okay. So you already have contact lenses.
I already have contacts in, but if I need to read, no, this is just in the last few years. I need reading glasses. This is a new development.
Okay. So in addition to the regular.
Yeah, it's just a disaster.
Without your contact lenses, can you see well?
That's funny because if I'm reading at night, I just had to take my contacts out and I can read a book. I can hold it up. I can, but I can't see the computer screen. Anyway, riveting stuff.
Yeah.
So we're gonna. This is an episode that's not exactly right off the headlines.
No.
We're gonna talk about something that we've been talking about a lot. Just the two of us.
Yeah. This was like it has to do a little bit with the topic of my debate, which was a sexual revolution, and a kind of a tangent that I fell into, like a little rabbit hole when I was researching and prepping for the debate itself. This idea
prepping
of prepping for something
you were
that
not
was
able to
was
use
totally
90% of your
90. I don't think I was able to use anything. Like there was like 2 things I was able to use, but it was
okay.
Anyway.
This is the Free Press debate. In case you're just joining us, this is the Free Press has the sexual revolution failed debate that was in Los Angeles last month.
It wasn't much of a debate, but it was a show, and it was a fun show, I think, for the people in the audience. Anyway, I was a little bit disappointed because I was ready with my little, my little debater hat on.
But you won anyway.
I won, yeah.
Yeah, so this is the era that's referred to sometimes as the baby scoop era. And my understanding is this is from about 1945 to 1973. And unwed mothers, basically, if you were pregnant out of wedlock, chances are you would be, let's just say, highly encouraged to give up your baby for adoption. And you did some research and found out it wasn't quite that straightforward even.
No. And it's interesting because this is a time in which adoption became normalized. Before kind of the early, 1920s, 30s, it wasn't a very common thing in America to use adoption as a way of building your family. People were concerned that the kids that they would receive might be, might have some physical problems, or is there something wrong with like, the product that you were receiving. But it was also just frowned upon socially, because there was, nobody liked the idea of potentially taking a child away from their mothers. So this was a period in which it became increasingly normalized to adopt children, partially because it was likely that there were just more unwanted, quote unquote, unwed mothers who were, who were in this predicament of having to be a single mother at a time in which that was just simply not acceptable, and there were not a lot of options available to you as a single mother. So many of them were pressured to give it up. And I think it's just fair to say, we don't even have to say that, they volunteer, quote unquote, to give it up. I think we should just be clear about it and say that they were coerced, because those who have looked into the, like, historians and various people who are interested in the history of adoption in America, who have looked into the baby scoop era, found that many of the young women who had fallen pregnant and had given up their babies, when they were later asked about it, when they were interviewed, or just when anyone at all had asked them about it, they found that the vast majority were haunted by the decision. And they didn't even call it a decision most of the time. They said that somebody took my baby away from me, like somebody stole my baby. And that this was a traumatic event in their lives that they thought about often, but it was a time where you really couldn't talk about it. The whole point of giving away your baby was to sort of pretend like it hadn't happened.
Right.
You hadn't gotten pregnant.
Right.
You had never had sex. You were a virgin still, and then you could pretend like you could just erase it from your mind. And so they had no one to talk about it. They had to keep it a secret. And it was something that they thought about a lot. And it was just, it was shocking how many babies were relinquished in this time, and, separated from their mothers. It's shocking.
So did you come across in your research, like, what were the scenarios? Because I mean, my understanding was that, like, these would be young women or teenagers, and they would go to a home for unwed mothers, right? And then, there's all this idea of the Magdalene laundries. Like, this is something that came out of Ireland, where, like, literally the girls would be taken and, like, they would do laundry, like, during the course of their pregnancy. And I mean, I remember. This was something that was not uncommon. I mean, this was like something that you would see on an after-school special or on a TV show or something. Like, somebody would get pregnant and then they would go, like, to some kind of.
This happened to in your time.
No, I was a kid, but I
remember.
I remember watching, like, some episode of some TV show, and that would happen. But it was not. It was portrayed as like, oh, this teenager got pregnant and we're going to help her. And so we're going to, she's going to go to a place where there's other girls like her, and they'll be kind of like she was going to boarding school or something. Like, she was just going away for a period of time, and she's going to have the baby and give it up to a good home. And this would be better for everybody. She would be able to go have her life. The baby would have parents that would be able to care for it. And it, I never, I didn't think about it too hard as I was growing up, but it was really portrayed as like a win-win,
Right.
And I never thought of it as particularly tragic, although, certainly there would be a lot of women who would talk about having done this. There were a couple high profile cases. Patti Smith, actually, I think when she was 19 or 20 or something, had a baby, gave it up. Joni Mitchell famously, and wrote a lot of songs about it. It's a big part of her biography. But so this is so like, what was your sort of like relationship to the concept of adoption just throughout your life?
I mean, I think I had never really thought very much about, the mothers themselves. Like, I assumed what everybody assumed, which is that they just didn't want the child, or they're in the kind of circumstances where they can't possibly keep the child. And that because of the mother's circumstances, it is, in everybody's best interest, to have the baby be adopted by a loving family, a loving and stable family, I don't think I thought too hard about the mothers themselves. I presumed that if this was happening at all, it was probably happening because, on some level, the mother allowed it to happen. And it really, messed with me to read all these cases and these interviews of women who had what they say is relinquished or surrendered their baby. That's what they say, surrender, because it's like they say that it I never felt like I gave my baby away. I felt like the baby was taken. I felt like, and then I grieved in the way that a parent grieves when they, lose their child, whether by death or by forced separation like this one. But so many of them described the event, that as something that was, the defining, most significant and, defining event of their lives, something they thought about all the time. They did not move on, forget and move on and build a new life. They constantly thought about their child. Many of them regretted having gone through it, but they also felt like they had no other option.
I mean, I think it's probably unimaginable. Like, I think
right.
They probably can't even get their minds around an alternative other than some kind of shotgun wedding. I mean, so it's either like marry the guy who knocked you up or do this.
Their parents would never allow it. They would say, you're going to be disowned. Like, if you come back home with a baby, we're never going to talk to you again. I mean, there was no way for a woman to survive in that time, especially in the post-war years, with a baby and not be married. It was just an impossible thing for her to do. And so, but even then, right, even though this was such an impossible thing, so many of them recount the experience of labor in these maternity homes, and one of the most horrifying aspects of it is that these homes were really run by people who, I mean, they were convinced that they were doing the right thing. They were often working with the adoption agencies, which is, it's not amazing that there was like a profit motive involved, but they did not provide any kind of social social work or therapy or any kind of counseling to the young women about what labor was going to be like, what kinds of things it would feel afterwards. It was nothing like that. It was just they went into labor not expecting what would happen, not expecting the consequences of like the postpartum period, what would happen to them emotionally, what would happen to them physically. It was just traumatic all around. But many of them describe giving birth and then seeing their baby and not wanting to let go. Like, despite everything, despite the social consequences facing them, they wanted to keep their babies. And then they describe being coerced by, the caseworkers in the maternity home, doctors, nurses, like anyone around them to give up their baby. They were often kept in the dark about their rights, and led to believe that they couldn't take, there's some period where you can, like, after, relinquishing your child, where you like formally give it up. But they were kept in the dark about a lot of about their legal rights, to keep their babies, and led to believe that they had kind of already given them up, and they didn't have many rights over this child. But it's so heartbreaking to read these stories of these women who describe looking at their babies, falling in love instantly, and thinking in, this like primal way, which I remember, like when I first gave birth, because it just wasn't something I expected, but it is deeply primal. You fall in love instantly. You don't want to let go. And that's what happened to these girls. And they had to let go anyway. And they grieved, terribly.
Sometimes I think they weren't even given the baby. I mean, I've heard stories like that. They didn't even get to see the baby. And I feel like also sometimes their parents were colluding with these homes or with the adoption agency. I mean, I feel like I've heard stories of the women being told by their parents or other people that the baby had died, that kind of thing. But yeah, I mean, it's telling that this period officially ended in 1973, which, what else happened in 1973? Roe, right? So, I wonder, like I'm sure there were fewer out of wedlock births once you start getting legalized abortion. more access to birth control, that kind of thing. So like before, this is like, so before 1945, were people just not having like sex? They were not having sex outside of marriage. I mean, it's just this kind of like the era of the teenager, like you get this kind of post-war era. I don't know. And
They were having
also,
sex. They were having sex. They were steadily increasing. That's what's interesting about it, is that the teen part of it was just cars, like the ability of teenagers to be without parental like supervision.
yeah.
So they started having like out of wedlock births started rising, like 19 like 20s onward,
And yeah.
steadily until we get to this like this kind of peak in this baby scoop era, which collided with the societal acceptance of adoption as this like wonderful good that you're doing and you're helping everybody, it's just like a neat little happy ending for everybody, and they can make their families beautiful and whole with this healthy child. So parents who adoptive parents felt as if they were doing this wonderful thing for a baby in need that had been abandoned by its mother. And a lot of those babies also write about, to tell their own stories and talk about how they felt abandoned their whole lives and how that impacted them psychologically, only to find out when they were much older that they were in fact not unwanted.
Right. Yeah. I know so many people who are adopted.
Really?
Like, yeah. It's interesting. And so because we were talking about this earlier, so you actually don't know that many people. Like you didn't grow up with people talking about
I knew
this.
one like adopted kid, and he was like, it was his whole thing, it was his whole personality. But
wow,
there was
yeah.
But it was shocking. It was strange. And then I knew like two other people later on, but they were like very peripheral. Like they weren't friends. But yeah.
It's so normalized. I mean, I know so many people who are adopted, I can't even count. Like it's just something about them, and some of them think about it and want to find their biological parents or have found them. Others don't care at all. I mean, I know a lot of people who just have no interest in it. I actually know of somebody who was an identical twin, and she was born and they were adopted into separate families. It was through a Jewish adoption agency in New York. They actually wrote a book about it. It's called Identical Strangers. And they ended up finding each other, I don't know, in their 30s, maybe early 30s, late 20s. And they looked exactly alike. And the one of them with the adopted parents, the one I know, Paula, she would say that her adopted parents one time were like vacationing in France or something, and they saw a girl. They're like, oh my God, that looks just like our daughter. Like, what is, like, this young woman kind of walked past them like on the streets in Paris or something, and then kind of later figured out that very well could have been her identical twin who happened to be in Paris at the time. Just weird stuff. But yeah, and then people find their parents, and that's a mixed bag, It's never ever simple. I mean, I can't think of a single case where expectations have been entirely met.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know. There's so few people I know who are, I mean, just had one kid who I can recall. And in my adult life, I haven't run into many people. I just think that it has dwindled quite a bit. I mean, I know that the adoption industry has declined quite a bit. And this is why it kind of went international a couple of, like decades ago. So American babies, women stopped relinquishing them around the time it became more acceptable to be a single mother, thanks to the sexual revolution. It's so incredible that there is such a high demand for infants in particular, and that it fell so dramatically. I mean, I think even in the baby scoop era, demand still might have been higher than the supply.
Oh, I'm sure.
And that's why there were, those horrific cases like the woman Georgia Tan. Is that?
Oh yeah, tell us about her. I know a little bit about her.
Yeah, I don't want to linger too much on this story or on this woman because she's so horrifying, but she was one of the uh, uh, most sinister characters I think I've ever read about in my life. But she was a woman who ran, in Mississippi, who ran this adoption agency, like a children's home in Tennessee. And she was, I think, I mean, she what she ran was the front was an adoption agency, but what she was doing was child trafficking, like truly kidnapping children, selling them to wealthy families. She made a lot of money over the course of the time that she ran this home. She had officials in the government working alongside her who were colluding with her scheme. It's a really nefarious story, and you can I don't want to go into the grisly details because it is just horrifying when you hear from the children who were kidnapped. Many of them were poor. She would look for like good looking children,
and these were white children, presumably.
These were white children. She would drive around in a beautiful car, and cars weren't so common, especially in poor areas. And she would literally tempt the kids with like candy. Like
so these would be like older kids. These were not infants. These were like
sometimes they were really young. Sometimes they were a little older. But she was full on child trafficking. She was kidnapping children. She was doing whatever she could to get her hands on beautiful children, and then she would sell them to families. And even there was lots of there were lots of horrifying reports of what happened in the home itself, how deeply neglected the children were. Many died
after they were adopted. Their adoptive families were then
no, this was before. This was while they were in the home waiting to be adopted.
Oh, I see.
So she would kidnap them, put them in this home for kids, and some of them would make it out, and some of them would not. And it was just an incredible story. And do you think that there is something about a woman doing something so heartless and cruel that makes it worse in your, like, morally? Like, do you judge, do you have a double standard here, or do you think your instinct is
it's always
to go
women
lighter
who are
on
doing
her?
that? It's always like the nurse, somebody, the woman who sneaks into the maternity ward disguised as a nurse and kidnaps the baby. That's a woman. I think this kind of crime. Yeah, I mean, I've always been fascinated with Ghislaine Maxwell, Jeffrey Epstein's procurer.
Yeah.
I think that's her story is actually much more interesting to me than his in a lot of ways. But yeah, it's
you're right. It is often these nurses.
Yeah, I mean,
these women in very domestic kind of
like stuff that happens with kids. I think, other than the obvious, like child predator, sex predator, kidnapper, tend to be women. I mean, it's I'm also thinking, like, I feel like before 1945 there must have been a more community aspect of this. Like, if somebody's parents died, a relative would adopt the kids, or neighbor would take in the kids. Like, you certainly had a lot of people dying back then, children and parents. And I'm sure there was sexual abuse, and I'm sure that women were getting pregnant, out of wedlock, even in the 19th century and before that. So, who knows? But yeah, just this kind of sort of new frontier 1950s. We're going to sort of socially engineer the world in such a way that, people are living their best lives. I think that was, this is a reflection of that. But then the international adoption thing is a whole other kind of animal. I mean, I remember being in my early 20s and suddenly there were Chinese babies everywhere, like in New York City, just you would just see it. White parents walking down the street with their Asian baby in a stroller. And again, we all thought it was great. Like, we all thought, oh, these parents are such good people. They're doing an amazing thing. This kid's going to have a fabulous life. These were usually affluent, educated people. And I know a lot of parents who adopted these kids, and they had, they were totally well-intentioned, and in some cases it's worked out great. Like, it's really, really complicated, like, this is one of these topics that there's no right answer. I mean, now this leads me into something I want to talk about. I was a volunteer in the foster care system for several years, a while back here in Los Angeles County. And I was a CASA, which stands for Court Appointed Special Advocate. And this is a national corps of volunteers that actually works for the court. So basically, we basically do what a social worker cannot do because their caseload is just so overwhelming. So, we're assigned to a kid a case, and we're not really mentors. Like, we do hang out with the kid, but mostly we're investigators. Like, we keep track of, how they're doing in school and what's going on with their biological family or their foster family, or like, what do they actually need? And then we write up court reports, and then we go into the court when they have hearings and tell the judge exactly what's going on with the case. Anyway, I spent several years very, very much enmeshed in a particular case. But I bring this up because the world of adoption around foster care is something that people really romanticize. And I had been guilty of that myself. And then once you get in there and see just how incredibly complicated it is. And I, having experienced that world, I now think there are many cases in which kids are better off staying with their biological families, even if those families are like horrible abusers.
Why?
Because at the end of the day, the
system itself is that bad?
I mean, I don't mean like,
or is it just the process of separation that's that bad?
I mean, I think obviously the parents should not continue to abuse them. I mean, like, there's extended family. So like if you've got a kid in a bad situation, I never thought I would say this, and this is not in all cases by any means. Let me just be very clear. But I used to think that no matter what, if there was a kid in an abusive situation, taking him and putting him in with some nice, affluent, educated parents who would never do that kind of thing was like a 100% improvement. And that's just not the case. People really need their biological families. They need their blood relations. And there's
why do they need them? I mean, I know, I feel like intuitively I understand. No, yeah.
Because I think people knowing who you are is incredibly important, even if who you are comes from some really bad blood. Even if you've got some really, really bad epigenetic history there. And again, there are adoption cases out of foster care that are huge successes. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that I was surprised that this is not always the case. That there are situations in which this child is so traumatized in a particular way that it is almost impossible to put him in a placement that is going to work.
And it's also the case that you don't just take the child away from the parent, the mother or the father. You take them away from their entire family and network, so I know a lot of people who have been through abuse. I don't know that many people who have been adopted, but who went through like pretty horrific abuse at the hands of one or both parents. And, they've come out of the other side, but they have siblings who they love and have like close bonds with. A lot of time the siblings, are they each other's like lifelines.
That's all they have.
What happened. Yeah. But then they might have aunts and uncles and grandparents who they're close to and now maintain like connections with it. There's, it's really is a network that you're separating a child from, not just that one parent that,
Yeah. And caseworker approaches sort of go in and out of fashion. For a while, it was thought that it was almost always better to put the kid in a placement that was not a family placement at all. Just get them totally out of the situation. And I think more recently, there's been greater efforts to keep families together, even if it means putting the kid with grandparents or aunts and uncles or somebody with some connection to the family. And I think, one of the things that's I like about foster care, I mean, ideally, you've got a placement, either a permanent placement or, temporary placement, a foster placement, where the adoptive parents are in communication with the biological parents. Like, it really does take a village. It's such a cliche, but I think that like you can have a really good situation where kind of everybody knows what the deal is and nobody's kidding themselves about how they're going to save this kid and give them a whole new life and deliver them an entire new personality and set of circumstances. If everyone can just sort of see that this kid needs like a wraparound, you call them wraparound services, but it's also sort of like wraparound just kind of family structure. I think that can work really well. But the thing about the foster care world, it's amazingly fascinating because you've got like every kind of person. I mean, you've got people who are really, really just do not have it together, like, using drugs in the home and abusive and poverty and all this stuff. And then you've got people who are very wealthy and advantaged. You've got this kind of donor class who are, contributing to these various charities that have to do with adoption and foster care. You've got religious people. I mean, a lot of the adoptive parents during, Baby Scoop and since then, especially the international adoption parents were Christian, fundamentalist Christians. I mean, that's very much part of their ethos. So you have like religious fundamentalists in the foster care world and also a lot of LGBT people, because often they cannot get an adoptive child outside of the foster care system. They are going to get an older child. So it is this like really incredible world of people coming from very, very different places, sometimes working at cross purposes, but also in many ways wanting the same thing, which is a good outcome for these kids. And also the experience of raising a kid.
Yeah. So that's where I kind of start to like ethically, my I don't know, my intuitions lead in a lot of different directions here, because on the one hand, I think that it would be terrible to not be able, be able to have your own family, like, and to be able to build one. I think that it's hard for me to put myself in that position now that I'm, now that I'm a mother. It's hard for me to go back and put myself in that place. But before I was a mother, I remember thinking that it would be, this is what I wanted. I wanted a family. I wanted a big family, actually, as big as I could make. But that if I didn't have a family, like if I wasn't a mother, that I would be okay. I would be able to make a good life for myself anyway. And, I would just have to hustle and like find friends who are still with me when I'm like older and battier. But I do feel like I get that people deeply want families. They want to build their own families, and this is the only way they can have it. At the same time, I don't know if anyone has a right to a family, like to their own children. Like, children are not commodities. Children are not experiences, although definitely they are treated that way. But that's not an ethical thing, and I don't know if we should encourage it. You know what I mean? Like, so I think there's some... there's the idea of everyone should be able to have everything, and we should do what we can to enable everyone to have every kind of experience, be they, gay and or a lesbian couple and not able to produce for any reason. Although lesbians can, I guess it's only gay men.
Well, gay men could have they could get
a surrogate.
Yeah. I mean, this is really tricky. I mean,
is it often gay men who adopt but lesbians, I'm sure, like, now I'm talking out of my ass. I don't know.
I don't know what the data is, but I mean, obviously it's a little bit easier for lesbians. They just go get a sperm donor. But I know a lot of gay male couples who have adopted and also used surrogates and gone through all of that to great expense. And I also know a lot of straight couples who've used surrogates and gone through all of that to great expense.
Yeah. And I know that too. Yeah.
And they have made that decision after considering adoption often. I mean, one thing that drives me crazy is when people say, well, why didn't you just adopt? And that's a little glib. First of all, it's a lot harder to adopt than people realize. And also, especially if the kid is older, like especially if you're talking about, adopting from foster care, that is a parenting experience, but it is a totally different kind of parenting experience than you would get from having your own child or adopting a kid from infancy even. I mean, it is a valuable experience, and I know people who are amazing at it and have great outcomes, and it's the right path for them, but it is a completely different thing than having your own. And I think that's what that's the missing piece. Like, that's what people don't realize. Like, they are signing up for something else. And so if that's not what you want, then you are going to have to consider other options. And as long as they're available, people are going to do it. It's so tricky. I just don't think there's any right answer.
Yeah. And it is, but I have to say that even with, I think that, I know women who have, they could not produce like their own children, so they had to get a surrogate, like, straight couples who had to do that. I don't know if, I have never been in that situation where I adopted a child.
Not that no.
I haven't adopted any children. I've only had biological children. But I feel like,
if somebody came to you and they're like, "I'm your adopted child," you just didn't know.
And this is
kind of blow your mind.
I'm gonna try and Meghan. I'm gonna try and choose my words carefully here, because I know this is a really sensitive topic, but it's hard for me to separate psychologically the physical experience of being pregnant and giving birth with being a parent. I think it's interesting how, like, the surrogacy industry and so many of the other little technologies that we have that ease the burden on mothers are in fact, like, desexing parenthood. There's mothers and fathers, but if everybody's, if there's, the mother is not necessarily the person that gave birth to the child, nor is she the person who breastfed the child, then she's just, there are two parents. It's very equal. It's a very, like, nice little egalitarian world, but it's interesting. It's like kind of desexed in a way, because I think that specific maternal role, which is unique, and I think that if I had another child, I never had one, so maybe we should talk to somebody who's given, biologically given birth to their own children, and use something like a surrogate or adopted.
Well, I think
to talk about, like, their experiences, and how they felt in terms of, like, how they bonded with the baby, because I feel like there were so many chemical things happening in my brain that made me into a mother. Like, it wasn't just simply that it wasn't simply an experience. It was literally my brain different. You know what I mean? Like, especially in the first couple of weeks postpartum, like, I was insane. I was a crazy person. I've had so many conversations with other mothers who share their experiences, like the ones that I've had, where like, you know what your baby sounds like within, like, you've heard your baby cry once, and now you can recognize that cry in a room full of, like, screaming infants. You know which one is yours. Like, there's all these crazy little, almost like, I would have thought that women were, they were imagining it a little bit. I would have gaslit mothers a little bit until I experienced it. And I had an experience, like, soon after I gave birth, where our son was taken to the nursery for a little while. We needed, like, a break, needed to be able to go to sleep, and they were like, okay, we'll take him to the nursery.
In the hospital, you mean?
In the hospital. This was, like, soon after birth, and I remember I, like, heard a cry. At, like, an hour or so later, I heard a cry. It was so faint, but it woke me, like, jolted me up, and I'm exhausted. I've just had labor. It's been a few hours since I've had labor. Jolts me awake. And I say to my husband that he's right there, like, he's out there. He's not in the nursery. He's there for some reason, like, out in the little nurse's station in the hallway. And my husband said to me, what, first of all, he couldn't hear the cry that I heard. He couldn't hear it. It was so faint that he couldn't even hear it. But then he was also saying, you're being crazy. You don't what are you talking about? Like, the nursery is way far away. There's no reason that he would be there. Go to sleep. Go to sleep is not there. And I was like, no, listen, I know 100%. I know for a fact that my baby's right there.
Mm-hmm.
And you need to find out why he's there and why, he's not in the nursery. And he just, he was like, no, go to sleep. Like, go to sleep. And then, a little while later, a nurse came in, and I asked her, I was like, at around this time, did you have him here for any, some reason or any reason? Or was he like, did he move across this hallway? And she was like, yeah, he like came to get some ear screen, something that there was some reason that
maybe
was there
he was
at
already doing some pre-med training.
No, but
hanging out at the nurse's station, just kind of,
and my husband was just like, my husband was like, how did you know? Like, how did you know that was him? How could you, like, we're in the maternity ward, right. You're hearing screaming babies here and there, but I knew, and I knew in a way that I don't think I've ever known anything in my life. It was just like my reptile brain was like, that's it, that's your kid, And I've had so many different conversations with my friends that were very similar. Like, it's just that same story.
And so you can see why people would want that. You could see why that would be a tremendous loss to somebody who wants that and can't have it. I mean, what you just described is making an argument for everybody should be able to do it.
No, but this labor situation, everybody literally can't, right? Like what I had.
Well, what if it was an egg donor?
If I had
do you think it would be any different? Yeah,
I think it would be the same. Yeah, it would be the same. I think
carried that child.
It's a process of labor itself that tells your brain, you're a mom now. Like, your brain doesn't know that this is not your own egg,
Mm-hmm.
And it treats the person that comes out of you as your own child, and all those hormones come, and you're bonding with it, and your brain changes in its structure and begins to pay attention to the little details of your child in a way that it never. So I think what I meant is that there's something special about that process.
No, I hear you. Yeah.
Of giving physical birth that I think made me into a mother that is different than parent. And not to say that there's nothing amazing about being a parent, but just that I think it is different.
Yeah.
And I can see also why that's very useful for a very, very delicate young child to have somebody that's completely insane, and like wired to like treat every little tiny little sigh and cough as if it's like the end of the world.
Although there are mothers for whom that doesn't happen. There are mothers who are not up to the job, who are on drugs, who have mental health issues, like go down the line.
Yeah.
So no, I mean, I don't know. I mean, this is the thing in foster care. It's always like, it's never the right situation. It's the least bad situation that you want to get the child into. And so like with this whole topic, it's like, there's no right answers. It's sort of like, what's the least wrong, I guess, when it comes
I think for
to
the child, it's, do what you can to limit the harm in the family itself, and intervene if you need to intervene, but have more counselors who are, available for that family and servicing the family. But I don't know much about the industry, and I don't know how or industry. But
I mean, not even with. I mean, but any kind. And I'm not even talking about foster care necessarily. They're just like a lot of extremely dysfunctional people who are having children.
Mm-hmm. That's always been the case, and I don't know why. I don't know necessarily if intervention is always better than, than letting it be, or intervening in a way that it would allow what naturally goes on to be a little bit healthier. I think we have like a bias towards like severe intervention that I'm now kind of suspicious towards.
Well, what do you mean?
Just, I think that there's generally this idea that we can build this perfect world and we can just move people around, little pieces of little things, and build that perfect experience, that perfect life where you have, the family that you wanted, and you have it the way that you wanted it. And your children are perfect and wonderful. And I just feel like there's so much, there's a sense that certain things are owed to us, and then we can build them and we can have them. And I think on the whole, this very, we can create this beautiful, like, utopian world is a good thing. But in some ways, I can see it being harmful, and I can see it being, causing more harm, actually. Like the baby scoop era is, I think, one of those times where everybody was convinced that we're doing the right thing. Everybody involved in the adoption process was thinking that they were doing the right thing. The parents thought they were doing the right thing. But I think it's pretty clear when you look at what actually happened and you talk to the mothers, and the vast majority of them are saying that, nope, I didn't want to give up that baby. I didn't want to do it. Everybody else made me do it. I wouldn't have done it if it was up to me. I could never have done it. Like, they would have preferred to be pariahs. They would have preferred poverty over giving up their children.
They're also, okay, I'm just for devil's advocate. I mean, they say that. Do they also say, I would not have gone on to have the life that I had. I would not have gone on to marry. I would have not gone on to have the children that I raised. I mean, you do
probably
hear that too.
Probably. Yeah. I mean, and then that is true. Of many of them they would, but I from the stories that I was reading, I mean, it might also be that they were selected, right? Like, to some degree, that the people that want to talk about it are the people who are most wounded by the situation. That always happens. But I think I understood, or I thought that I understood the young mother who gives up their child, because thinking rationally and sanely that it was good for me and it was good for the kid. Before, I think I kind of understood what the logic behind how that could work. After being a mother myself, I just have a very hard time empathizing with that mindset. I think that I would have been kicking and screaming forever and haunted forever, even if it meant that, I was allowed to build a beautiful life afterwards. It would have just felt hollow, and some of that is because I was raised without a lot of money. I was raised in like a not a perfect environment. I think in many ways it was a good environment. And then I had a 2-parent household. But a lot of things were not amazing. I wouldn't call them dysfunctional, but, not ideal. And I don't, I think that was still a good life.
Yeah, but I don't think it has to do with money. I mean, there's a lot of adoptive parents that were not wealthy at all.
Yeah, but that was a big part of it, was just that they would be thrown into poverty, and never be able to marry again. That they would be
or just
relying on the dole of their.
I mean, look, you've got like a girl from a strict Catholic family. She is going to be unmarriageable. I mean, I think that the economic thing is a factor. I don't know how. I mean, it's one of many factors. It was certainly. Do we know the numbers? Like, how many babies were adopted during that period? I mean, are we talking like tens of thousands?
Millions is what we're talking about. So there's different estimates that I heard in different places. But between the whole era, the baby scoop era, which was spanning a couple of decades, it was millions of kids. And then the peak of it was in the 1960s, like right up until the point of the passage of Roe v. Wade.
Yeah, that's my era. That's my generation. I mean, I know a ton of people born my year who were adopted, for sure.
I think it was like 1970. That was like the peak year.
That's
where it
the
was
year
like
I was born.
90,000 or something, like almost that much. It was like an incredible amount of adoptions, like non-relative adoptions.
Right.
And then it just fell off of a cliff, which is so incredible, because I think that that's all that the mothers needed, I think, was just like a little.
Well, there was also abortion. There was also those babies were being aborted.
Some of them, like abortion, almost certainly had something to do with the decline, but I don't think that that was entirely the case. I can actually look up the numbers.
Yeah, I'd be curious, because I'm not sure that there's not a lot of difference between 1968 and 1974, in terms of stigma.
Okay, so here's in 1970. Approximately 80% of the infants born to single mothers were taken for adoption purposes, whereas by 1983, that figure had dropped to only 4%. So these are infants we know are born to single mothers. So
yeah, but they were born. So there's a whole bunch of ones that were aborted, right?
Right. No, but just out of the ones that were born, just the percentage of the ones that were born, that percentage declined.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
Okay.
So,
Yeah.
Yes, a lot of them were
Yeah.
aborted.
I
You're right.
think by 83, the picture was very different. The 70s, I mean, stuff really started to change. I would think like mid 70s, it would still be a stigma. By 83, we had, you know, we had like people, we had this idea of the empowered single woman raising a baby by herself. I mean, it's funny when I was in college in the late 80s and early 90s, one of the sort of paradigms, I mean, this was a college that had a lot more women than men, let's just put it that way. But like I think a lot of the girls sort of imagine themselves being single mothers of adoptive babies. It was like this kind of, yeah, it was a particular kind of
Ugh.
glamorized paradigm. Yeah.
Ew.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, there were like a show, there was this, there were like,
Ugh.
yeah, no, you would live in some like fabulous loft apartment and wear like a Chinese, a Japanese silk kimono as your bathrobe and have this, cool artsy career. And you never really, met a man worth settling down with, but at some point you adopt a baby and you just have everything. Oh yeah. Or you have a baby with your gay friend. I think that was a big, oh yeah, that was a big thing. That was
Ugh.
very much a sort of, kind of
Why?
template because you knew you weren't gonna, because if you can't find like a guy that you want to marry, and you want to do that, then like do it with your gay male friend.
Okay.
That's what there was a movie with Jennifer Aniston and Paul Rudd about that. Was it The Object of My Affection? Based on the Stephen Macaulay novel. Yeah, it was a really good movie actually. They were gonna, or she was, I can't remember what the situation was, if she was pregnant or she wanted to get pregnant. Anyway, yeah.
I mean, that's a different situation. That's like it doesn't gross me out the way a single woman adopting a child makes me think.
Really? I mean, I know a lot of single women who've adopted children by themselves. Many.
No. I mean, for the purpose that you're like this idea that it's fashionable, like to do it.
It was
that's something you dream about.
Modern. It was modern.
Okay.
I think that was the feeling, and that it was just better. Like, not better. Look, obviously, if the ideal would have been to like find, a great guy who was a provider and also educated. And, you want to find an architect that also wore a hard hat when he went onto his construction site. I mean, you want like the artsy guy who's also a provider, all these ridiculous requirements.
Yeah.
And so barring that, yeah, I think women did not want to mess around with people who were not up to the job.
Yeah. And then so I think what did happen, because I actually know lots of people who were raised by single parents. That is something I did know. I didn't know many kids who were adopted, but I did know lots of people who were either, their parents had divorced or their parents had never married, and they were raised by primarily usually the mom, but I actually had neighbors who were raised by like the dad. And it wasn't always a great situation, but sometimes it was. Like sometimes the single parent was like up for the task and working constantly to like provide for their children. But I think that what I also found is that a lot of these kids who went through a primarily single parent upbringing seem to be very pro marriage and like very committed to the idea of like getting married and then staying married for the kids. And I think that's really telling and kind of sad. But I've noticed that trend myself, because those are the people I knew.
Right. Well, also people who are high achieving and highly educated are more likely to stay married. I mean, the 2-parent household, that you see that in the educated classes. I mean, that's the irony of it, is all these people, liberal elites are going on about how we shouldn't judge and we should, support single parent households, and it doesn't matter. You don't need a father, all this kind of stuff. But they're the ones that, always have higher rates of 2-parent households. Always.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. I think it's kind of sinister to like, I'm glad that the conversation about the importance of like a 2-parent household, like marriage is coming back up. And it's not that, I don't come from a I actually rejected my traditional upbringing in many ways. But it makes sense. The economics of it makes sense to me. And the second you spend time with, a really young child, even as babysitting a young child, you see how big of a job it is. It is, you do need two people who are there, um,
Well, you
who
need
have each
two
other's
people
back.
who are competent. I mean, this is the thing.
Competent,
Like,
committed. I
what?
mean,
Okay, but what
even
if you can't find a
half
guy?
competent,
Okay, what if you're a woman and you want to have a kid and you just can't find a guy? You've never met somebody who would marry you. Just full stop right there. What are you supposed to do?
that wouldn't marry. I okay, so those are different scenarios. Like if I was willing to marry certain guys, but they weren't willing to marry me, and I'm just like stuck with like nothing, then okay. I would still probably enlist family members. I would still probably like try to move back in with my parents or something.
Okay,
Like
and then
knowing what I know
and have a
now,
child by yourself.
and have a child by myself.
Okay,
Like
but I think people do
knowing what I
that
know. Yeah. Lots of low income women, actually, that's what they do. They live with parents. They live with, like, it's like mom and grandma who like
because the
end up raising
men
the
are
children.
not up to the
They're
job.
not.
It's like having another child. I mean,
I think,
that's
yeah. Well, sometimes it's like having another child. Sometimes it's also like that they cheat. They will like have
right.
cheat and leave the woman and
It's
kind of
like
thing.
having it's an extra burden. So, but right, but you're saying two different things. Like, so I mean, the two parent household is better, but I'm saying it's only better if certain criteria are met.
I don't think that, but it depends on what, if you think that that's what's going on with most men. Like the problem with most men is that they're children, like, and that's why women aren't marrying them. I don't know if that's the case, and that I don't know if that's what's stopping, but that's, that's not my position, so I don't know. But for my friends who I'm judging, on the side, but from the experiences that I've seen, it's more of that there was not enough compatibility or romance, or there was some expectation of something that
Right. They didn't want to
fall
settle.
through.
Right.
But
Yeah.
but that's what I've seen more than they were children, because I see a lot of grown men who are also being rejected.
Yeah, look, it depends on the
competent,
community. I mean,
but
like, we've talked about this, like in the Black community, which is not something either of us has any standing to speak about. You do hear from
to be
this.
sure,
You hear this from women
to
all
be
the
sure,
time.
yeah.
That it's actually would be more burdensome to have the father of their child live
Right.
in their house. I
Right.
mean, also there's also rates of incarcerations. There's all kinds of variables, but I just don't think it's simple. I mean, I've been thinking about this a lot, and I want to talk about this maybe on another episode. But I like it that this conversation about the ways in which the sexual revolution had unintended consequences that have been pretty significant. I like that conversation has come up, but I also I also think it's not everybody can like play by these rules. Like, it just doesn't work out for everybody. And it's not so easy. I guess it's nothing is so simple,
So I think the question is whether creating an environment that gives these the misfits, I suppose, I don't know how to phrase it, but like the all those cases in which that doesn't work out. I think the question is that the difficult question is that does creating that kind of environment that eases the burden on these other cases also create an environment in which that standard, that norm is simply untenable for everyone. You know what I mean? Like that is just that it loosens the whatever social glue needed to keep somebody who could have had that, that kind of more stable family environment. And I'm torn, I don't know how to feel about it. Because I do know lots of people who had single parents, and it wasn't like the best ideal upbringing, but it was like they're alive and it's good that they were it's good that they had their parent in their life. It's hard to say one way or the other, but maybe there is something we can do about recognizing the place that marriage has in, and not marriage in this like traditional like trad, this is such a sanctified by God kind of way, but just the general idea of a partnership, and of like building your life together with somebody with whom you intend to build a family, you know, like with
Right.
family being that end goal of your life, you know. And I don't think that that's how I thought of myself, you know, like I didn't think family is my end goal. I just thought of like, you know, I'm a young woman in the world and I'm going to live my life, you know, until at some point, you know, I recognize that, oh my God, I do want a family. And if I want a family, I got to like make a move.
Well, when did you recognize that? What age would you say?
I think sort of if you had asked me when I was like a teenager,
Well,
whether,
of
you know,
course.
I would have said like, I'm going to be single in my 40s. Like, I'm going to be one of those women. Like, I'm going to be, you know,
Yeah,
I'm going to
exactly.
enjoy it.
You
And
would
I'm going to be
you would adopt
high-powered
the
and I'm going to
baby with
enjoy
the
it. And I'm going to,
Japanese kimono robe.
Yeah, and I'm not going to live that life. I think I was disgusted by the idea for a very, very long time. And then it was, I think what did speed up the process of me recognizing that I want a family was falling into a social circle where there were a lot of older women who have now hit like this wall of, you know, like, oh my God, I want a family. I recognize now that I want a family. Also, my career is at its peak and so demanding. Also, there's no men left. You know, also I have like 2 years like to have a kid. Like I began to see with my own eyes these women who were under just impossible circumstances. And I remember thinking, if they can like, you know, end up in this position, and these are like beautiful, like super intelligent, like high achieving, everything, like, you know, good at everything kind of people.
Of course.
And if they can land in this kind of situation and be unhappy about it, then surely like I will end up there. So I got to change what I'm doing, and I got to change the times, the scale, you know, in my head, the timeline in my head of when I need to do certain things. So
but you had met your husband though. So
I'd already met my husband.
this was
but I
within the
would've-
context of a relationship.
this was in the context, but
Right.
I also find it, I don't know. I've always been, I don't know. I'm like a long-term relationship kind of gal. I like relationships. I like being partnered. I don't like, I mean, single wasn't terrible. It wasn't.
You were
like,
single for 3 months. What
Like
do you,
2.
when was this
But
fabled? Like 2 months.
Yeah.
When was
but I
this
didn't like
fabled
it.
single period?
I didn't
that
like.
you were?
I just didn't like. Yeah. Well, I didn't.
Okay.
I didn't like
You
it.
would have gotten used to it after, you know.
Would I have?
If you were single for 3 months, you would have gotten used to it. You'd be like, I got
Okay.
this.
Yeah. I just feel like I think I thrive in a partnered situation. I think part of it is because I am not that sociable. If I was a kind of person who really was, it was easy for me to make friends. It was easy for me to go out all the time, like get out the door, you know, then I think that maybe I could have enjoyed a single life. But given how like much of a homebody I am, I just need like, it's just the easiest way to have human contact.
Yeah.
You know,
Well, you can be a
at the end of the
homebody
day.
and be single as well. This is the phase that I'm in. It's quite lovely.
It is
Yeah.
not at all the stage you're in. You're like going out all the
I
time.
never go
I'm like
out.
hearing all the time. Compared
You
to
only
me,
think I go out because
compared
you're
to
like,
me,
no,
'cause
because you're
I'm
like,
never
oh,
going
I have
out.
to say, like, I can't answer this text because I'm going out, like, occasionally, and so that makes it seem like I'm going out all
because
the time.
you
but I'm
are,
just
you are going. You're like,
avoiding
oh,
your
I have
texts.
this lunch. I have this
Yeah, the
lunch. I have
lunch.
this like. I have this. I
Anyway,
have
talk
that.
like that.
And tomorrow I'm gonna hang out with my. You know, I'm gonna hang out with this. I'm gonna go to this dinner thrown by these like important people. I don't have this life.
Yeah, you could. You could. Everyone wants you to be there when I go to those things. They're like, "Where's Sarah? Why isn't she here?"
I am sleeping with my kid who's like,
Well, that's what I say, and they're like, "We're
drooling on my
we
face.
didn't hear that."
Like that's how I sleep. I sleep at like 8:45. I'm in bed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, okay. I have a lot of thoughts. I actually have a lot of thoughts. I want to talk about this in another episode, just about like when is the best time to couple up and brain development and all that kind of thing. Like,
really,
I've been thinking about, because here's the thing, and this is a topic for another episode, but we'll just tease this. So when we talk about like gender stuff, for instance, we say that the brain only finishes developing. The brain only fully develops when you're 25, right? Your brain is still developing. Okay. And so that's why we shouldn't make irreversible medical decisions. But at the same time, we're starting to say, well, it's better if you partner up early. There's the cornerstone marriage versus the capstone marriage. And all that I actually think is true. But if we're going to say that the brain is still developing until age 25, how can we say, well, you should find somebody while you're still in college before you're 22? How do you square those two things?
So you think that if somebody makes a decision like that before, so do you think that like you're basically like a legal minor before you're 25?
No, I just think it literally just occurred to me today that we in this space love to go around talking about how your mind is still developing until you're 25.
Yeah.
But we're also saying you should not wait so long before you make a huge decision and commit yourself to somebody in a certain kind of life.
Yeah.
So, I mean, again, this is a much bigger conversation, and I might write something about this too. But I remember being 25, and actually that is the year that I started completely reframing my sense of self, and like, oh, all the things that I thought were true about myself are actually maybe not true.
That's interesting, because I met my husband in my early 20s. I was like 21.
I thought you were
not
like
even
20.
20. Yeah, like,
yes.
I think I was. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I was. I think I turned 21. Yeah. No, yeah. What am I thinking? Yes. He was there at my 21st birthday. So yeah, no, but I
bet he was.
I was like, he's there. He was around. No, I mean, hey, I'd been drinking for a long time.
Yeah, you've been drinking for like 2 months. You've been single for 2 whole months.
That was the point at which I started drinking legally. But before then, I had lots of like I was like an expert in the fake ID world. Like I had fakes.
You should get back into that. That's a good side hustle.
I know all about it. And I actually had somebody else give me their ID, and I used it for a while, which was a real ID.
Was that person really white? Well. What ethnicity?
That person was, I mean, it was so amazing because she was half Hispanic, half South Asian like me. So she just looked brown. But she had a headscarf on, like on the ID. And I would use that ID to get into places, like with this woman with a hijab on.
Seriously?
And
wait, she was Hispanic? White?
She was half Hispanic. She was half Hispanic, half. She's extended member of my family.
Okay.
So married to mom was Hispanic.
Okay.
But she grew up like Muslim, and so she had like on her ID she had this like black headscarf on, and that ID, like, it was so crazy because the ID wasn't even given to me directly. Her Hispanic cousin from like her mom's side of the family, like, had the ID, and she was just like, she looked white, this girl, like, totally. And when she had turned 21, she like handed me this, and she gave it to me. She's like, "Girl, works like a charm. Everybody looks at that headscarf and says, oh,
like I'm not messing
like they
with
don't
this?
they don't scrutinize
but
it.
I thought you're not supposed to drink if you're Muslim.
Yeah, exactly. That's why it freaks people out. When you hand that ID to a bar, like, you know, the guy at the door, he just doesn't know what to do with it because he just focuses on the headscarf, right, and doesn't think about whether you look alike or not, and you just get in. And it was incredible. Brilliant. It was a great ID. Yeah. So if anyone's listening and is underage, that's find your
I think
Muslim
we could
friend.
make them. I think that could be a good merch item for us. Headscarf, fake ID, a special place in hell.
Yep.
Fake ID.
Yeah.
Right. Like state of residence, special hell.
Hell.
Special place. Town is special place. State is hell. Yeah. Well, anyway, I'm thinking more about this. But yeah,
we have a lot of merch ideas. It'll be fun. Let's do it. Let's get some merch.
Yeah,
sell some IDs.
Yes, for sure. Okay. Well, I think I don't think we've covered. I think we've sort of only scratched the surface of this topic, but it's very interesting.
Yeah. Anyway, subscribe to a specialplace.substack.com org. No. Yes. A specialplace.substack.com.
Com. Substack. Definitely. The Substack is a com.
The Substack is a com. Yes. Go there to subscribe if you want bonus episodes. And yeah, until next time.
Yeah. See ya. Thanks.